Hey everybody, welcome back to Movies in a Bottle. Today we're going to be breaking down a great but somewhat controversial movie from the 2000s. I think the themes it highlights are really important to keep in mind, but this is your heads up that we're going to be covering some pretty heavy ground this time around, and it'll be surrounding the topic of young mothers and the struggles of motherhood in general. I realize that a straight white male might not be the best spokesperson for these topics, but I do love this movie and I tried to do it justice. With all that being said, grab your orange Tic Tacs and let's roll film. This powerful and heartwarming journey begins during autumn in Minnesota, where the high schooler, Juno, is deep in thought staring at a discarded recliner while chugging a gallon of Sunny D. She finds herself reflecting on how her recent, shall we say, coming-of-age activity was done in a similar-looking chair, but more importantly, how said activity may have put a bun in her oven. After strolling through town during an awesome animated intro sequence, Juno finishes her Sunny D and then goes to the drugstore to get her third pregnancy test for the day because the first two were clearly broken. The employee, Rollo, momentarily withholds the bathroom key to tell her to read the writing on the wall, but she snaps that she's drank her weight in Sunny D and she's about to pop, so zip it and gimme the damn key. After receiving the third, quote-unquote, unholy little pink plus sign, Juno's world effectively flips on its head. She has to make some really big decisions and completely reevaluate almost everything about her increasingly uncertain future. To try and get a grip on things, Juno calls her best friend Leah, who always has a sympathetic ear. It takes a bit of convincing from Juno for Leah to really believe that she was pregnant, but Leah's a ride or die friend because without missing a beat, she offers to help Juno make an appointment at the clinic. Juno politely declines Leah's help with the clinic, but there is something else critically important that she needs her help with: moving the discarded living room set that she was staring at earlier out in front of the dad, Polly Bleeker's house. And while they were loading all the furniture up into Juno's van, Leah needs all the deets, so naturally Juno shares that while the kid was unplanned, the act itself was premeditated a year in advance. And while listening to her friend gush about Polly, Leah playfully teases Juno for being in love, and Juno doesn't deny it. And speaking of Polly, he goes through his morning routine of putting on his track gear, complete with matching short shorts and sweatbands, and then nuking a Hot Pocket, but instead of joining his track teammates for a morning run, he's met by Juno chilling in the discarded furniture in his front yard. After some brief small talk about his uniform, Juno outright tells Polly that she's pregnant. After a long silence followed by a visible gulp, the scared father asks what she's gonna do, and she says she plans to nip it in the bud because, allegedly, pregnancies lead to infants and she isn't ready for all that. Polly says, sure, whatever you want. But Juno isn't really feeling encouraged by his laissez-faire attitude, so she hurries off to school. And I never thought I'd be saying these words in this order, but I have trivia on what Juno refers to the track team's, quote, pork swords. To get the appearance of these sausage spears, the director tied balls, not that kind, to the team's waistbands and instructed them to kick their knees really high as they ran. Hopefully that trivia is not going to put me on a list somewhere, but anyways, at school we see a delightfully 2000s dynamic where you basically still have all your familiar archetypes and cliques of students, including cheerleaders, jocks, and weird girls who the jocks are secretly into, of course. And this bit has admittedly aged like spoiled milk, because Leah's in a camp of her own where she is into teachers, commenting to Keith how she also loves Woody Allen. Okay, I gotta address that Woody Allen comment. At first it seemed like a dig on his sister-wife situation, but after the Trumpstein files, this now has a significantly darker undertone to an already creepy situation on the surface. And here's your TLDR for that can of worms. Actress Mia Farrow adopted Soon-Yi Previn in 1977 from South Korea whenever they guessed she was about 7 years old. Only a few years later, in 1980, Farrow would start dating Woody Allen, which is, all fine and dandy. But then in 1992, when Soon-Yi Previn was 21, it came to light that she and the Hollywood mogul, Woody Allen, were in a relationship. Gross. And all that is why his recent revelation in the Trumpstein files didn't really surprise anybody. And for the creepy cherry on top, Juno's friend Leah put Keith's face over some posters in her room. But not a lot really happens at school today, except for we see that Juno and Polly are lab partners. How sweet. After school, Juno uses her hilarious burger-shaped phone to call the clinic to make the appointment her and Polly discussed this morning, and she guesses that it's about 2 months along. And to me it feels a little deliberate that she's using such a silly-looking phone to make such a serious phone call. But I digress. Over dinner, we get a rundown of Juno's family, and her mom took off whenever she was young, but her dad, Mac, is a hardworking, loving veteran, and her stepmom, Brenda, is a bit more serious than Mac, but she's just as loving. Notably, Juno doesn't tell anyone about her big, life-changing news just yet. The day of the appointment eventually rolls around, and on the way in, Juno has to walk past her fellow classmate, who is outside peacefully protesting the clinic, chanting, "All babies want to get born." Then after some small talk about school, the classmate addresses the elephant in the room by telling Juno Her unborn child has a heartbeat and even fingernails, which the potential mother seems to ponder for just a moment before heading inside. There, Juno has a terrible time right out the gate. First, the receptionist couldn't seem to care less about her job, and then everyone's nervous tapping and scratching becomes overwhelming for Juno, so as her own anxiety starts to creep in, she runs out of the clinic. The classmate beams, shouting, "God appreciates your miracle." Juno has no idea what to do from here, so she went to Leah's because she was going to pick her up after the procedure anyways. Feeling totally flustered, she would confess to her friend that she's decided to have the baby so it can go to a nice, deserving family who otherwise can't have kids. Leah warns Juno about all the social stigmas associated with being young and pregnant, but after it's clear her friend's mind is totally made up, Leah suggests that they look in the Penny Saver newspaper ads for a family to adopt the kiddo. At first, the two seem to be striking out over and over again with the ads because either the potential parents sound too weird or they already have kids and Juno thinks, quote, "They're greedy little bitches because they already have a family," end quote. But that's whenever Leah finds Vanessa and Mark Loring's ad and they seem perfect. Checking in with Polly real quick, he was reading a provocative yearbook note that Juno left him whenever his mom barges in and he quickly hides his hand behind his head. But she lets her son know that Juno called and she doesn't even try to hide that she doesn't like her, basically calling Juno weird. Whenever she finally leaves, Polly unhides his hand and I'd rather not speculate on what's going on with that crusty sock. The note left on Polly's yearbook was penned by the writer herself, Diablo Cody, and I also thought it was pretty neat that they decorated Polly's room with things like the Hebrew alphabet, dreidels, and his bar mitzvah certificate to show that he's Jewish. And actor Michael Cera, who plays him, is also Jewish, so I bet he appreciated that. And this one's neither here nor there really, but Polly also has one of those burger phones in his room, just like Juno does. Jumping back over to our main quest, Juno and Leah have been coordinating things with the adopting parents off-screen, but now that she has a game plan, she has to tell her dad, Mac, and stepmom, Bren. With her best friend at her side, Juno musters up all her courage and spits out that she's pregnant, and her parents are rightfully surprised. But whenever she admits that the father is Polly, Mac holds back a laugh, commenting, "You didn't know Bleecker had it in him," and Leah chuckles in agreement. However, Juno defends Polly and fires back by giving everyone way too much information that he's actually really good in chair, not bed. Again, way too much information. More importantly, Juno tells them about how she's going to be meeting Mark and Vanessa Loring soon, and Max supports her by declaring he's going with her to the meeting, while Bren immediately starts helping her with baby care. Oh, and Mac privately tells Bren that he's punching Polly in the wiener next time that he sees him. Later, when Mac and Juno meet with Mark and Vanessa, their fancy neighborhood makes it apparent that they're very well off. Also, Vanessa clearly has her heart set on things going well because she's meticulously prepared her lovely home to impress her guests. But after introductions, Juno and Max start chatting with the lawyer about baby details, and funny enough, the kid's due date is May the 4th, Star Wars Day. But more or less, the two agree on adoption details, and Juno clarifies that she doesn't want any compensation. She's not selling the kid, she just wants it to go to loving, caring parents. Vanessa bursts with joy, confessing that she feels her purpose in life is to be a mother, and a little less convincingly, Mark agrees that every guy wants to be a dad and do all the dad things, right? Juno excuses herself to the restroom, but afterwards, she bumps into Mark on her way downstairs, and while chatting with him, she notices his music room, so the two go on a side quest to talk about their shared hobby of being passionate musicians. Soon, the prolonged, awkward small talk taking place downstairs is interrupted by what Vanessa instantly recognizes as an impromptu jam session, so she marches upstairs to get Mark back on task. But they wrap up all of the paperwork, and then Vanessa nervously asks to stay updated, so Juno reassures her that she's 104% sure about going through with his adoption. Then, as soon as they say their goodbyes, Vanessa melts into Mark's arms because she finally has a real chance of becoming a mom. In an interview with The Guardian in May of 2018, writer Diablo Cody made it clear that the reason why Juno didn't have the procedure was simply because she didn't want to. She was pro-choice, and she chose to keep the baby. In the same vein, back in 2019, Cody also expressed regret for making this movie because of its association with political ideals that she does not agree with. Skipping ahead to winter, we see that Polly is now jogging alone, and the rumor mill is turning because another solo runner absentmindedly asks Polly if he knows if he's the father of Juno's kid. And yeah, Polly does, but later he's walking around with a ton of donut holes whenever he bumps into Juno in the hall. He invites her to partake in the upcoming diabetic coma, but she has to decline because of her ultrasound, so Polly, like a gentleman, offers to go with her. Juno appreciates the effort, but she can clearly see that he already had plans, so she smiles and again declines his offer to go. During the ultrasound, Juno, Leah, and Bren are told that the baby is looking perfectly healthy, but when the tech asks Juno if she wants to know the gender, she says no because she wouldn't want to spoil it for the adoptive parents. Then the tech makes a totally backhanded comment to the effect of, Thank God you're not going to be the parent because your dumbass got pregnant as a teenager. And I love this next part. Bren sets the tech up by asking her her title, so she says ultrasound tech. And then Bren destroys her by saying that, well, I'm a nail tech, so let's both stick to what we know. But then she goes on to drop the mic saying that her 5-year-old daughter could do her job, so go back to night school and learn a real trade. And Juno is totally here for the savageness. Vicious mockery aside, Juno is excited to update the Loring, so afterward, she drives over there with a picture of the ultrasound, but only Mark is home. Vanessa has been working late so she can save up as much time off for the kiddo as possible, and Mark is here because he makes music for commercials, which Juno naturally finds totally rad, even if she makes fun of Mark by calling him a sellout. Getting back to the main quest, Juno shows Mark the ultrasound photo, and he seems to be at a loss for words and lets out a flat, "Hey, look at that." Juno starts to explain the strict regimen that Bren has her on, but Mark is way more interested in the music playing because his favorite song came on, Sonic Youth's cover of Superstar by the Carpenters. But before they know it, talking about music turns into talking about movies, then they find themselves watching old horror movies all afternoon. They eventually get on the topic of baby names, and Mark points out how ironic it is for someone with the name of Juno to be making fun of other names. Juno defends her dad's choice, saying that he was way into Greco-Roman mythology. She adds that Zeus, or Jupiter, slept around, but he only had one wife, Juno, and she was supposedly really beautiful, but really mean. Then Juno is slightly caught off guard whenever Mark agrees that her name suits her, but thankfully, Vanessa gets home with her massive haul of baby supplies. Vanessa sees Juno and is immediately worried about the baby, but she calms down after Juno shows her the healthy ultrasound photo. Once Juno notices the massive amount of shopping bags, Vanessa awkwardly explains to Juno that she won't be having a baby shower because their situation isn't set in stone, so to speak, and an adoption has fallen through once before. Notably, Vanessa quickly glares at Mark after he vaguely states that someone had cold feet. And not long after, Juno reads the room and decides it's time to head home. Quick fun fact, according to Wikipedia, Juno is the Roman goddess of marriage, women, family, and the protector of women during childbirth. Right when Juno walks through the front door, Bren wants to know where she's been, and when Juno tells her, Bren wants to know why she drove an hour out of her way to East Jesus Nowhere instead of just mailing the photo. Juno can't see why Bren is so upset about her spending time with Mark, so her stepmom sternly tells her that she doesn't understand the dynamics of marriage and explains to her daughter that hanging out with Mark just isn't appropriate. At this point, emotions are running high though, so more or less, they agree to disagree and Juno storms off to Polly's. Quick side note from yours truly, marriage or not, someone Juno's age just shouldn't be hanging out with a dude Mark's age. Also, the lead singer in the band Green Day, Billy Joe Armstrong, liked Bren's line in the scene so much that he released a song called East Jesus Nowhere in 2009, and it was the second track on the album 21st Century Breakdown. Juno races past Polly's mom while accurately thinking that she looks like Samwise Gamgee from Lord of the Rings, but once she's inside Polly's room, Juno confesses that she misses hanging out with him, and it's pretty sweet, but Juno can tell that Polly is nervous because she clocks him reaching for his one and only vice of orange Tic Tacs. But she goes on to tell him about the adoption setup with the Lorings and how she even hung out with Mark today, which even strikes Polly as weird, but he's relieved to hear that her parents have decided not to tell his parents that he's the father. Juno wants to know if Polly will think he's cute even as she continues to balloon, and my man Polly strikes while the iron is hot and he says he'll always think she's beautiful. Polly adds that they should get the band back together after all this, and even better yet, maybe we should get back together too? Juno asks, when did we date? But he was referring to the word together in the more literal sense if you catch my drift, but ultimately he was asking her out. Feeling awkward, Juno suggests that he dates Katie DeVort, but Polly refuses, claiming that she smells like soup, which is as good a reason as any if you ask me. But back to the Lorings, Vanessa is having a difficult time getting any buy-in from Mark. He seems like he doesn't really want to be bothered with all this baby stuff because the adoption is so far away, but Vanessa reminds him that her parenting book says preparing, or nesting, is vital for the woman, especially when adopting. Then she reminds Mark to read the daddy chapters that she has flagged, but again, he doesn't really seem very interested. Later, while Leah and Juno were goofing around at the mall, they spot Vanessa walking around with a couple of her friends, and she's the only one without a kiddo. But Juno watches as she enthusiastically plays with one of the kids that leads her to the play place. And while Leah loses interest fast, Juno couldn't be more sure that she's making the right choice by helping Vanessa become a mother. And speaking of, the girls run into Vanessa as she's leaving the elevator, and Juno shows off the baby bump progress, but slightly winces after the baby kicks. Vanessa timidly asks if she could feel, so Juno excitedly yanks her hand over to her belly. However, Vanessa is disheartened whenever she feels nothing. But then she's overjoyed once she talks to her future miracle, and the baby does respond with a good kick. According to IMDb, this movie was filmed in only 30 days, and it was apparently difficult to fit all 4 seasons into that schedule. They had to get creative and do things like digitally darken leaves or even throw leaves around to give the effect of fall. Also, there was an unexpected snowstorm over Vancouver in March, but they took advantage of that and filmed some of the winter scenes during real snowfall and saved a ton of money on fake snow. Cha-ching! We're finally in springtime, everybody. Juno is now very pregnant, and naturally Bren is still helping, but most recently by converting all of Juno's waistbands to elastic. During school, Juno calls Mark to let him know that she's finished the rock mixtape that he put together for her, and she'll be raising him a mixtape of punk songs that she loves. Then while enduring rude looks from her fellow students, Juno scarfs down the totally stacked cafeteria lunch while chatting with Leah. Juno reminds her not to call Mr. Conyers Keith, which seems like it might be the pot calling the kettle black here at this point, but Leah gives her friend the crushing news that Polly's going to prom with Katie DeVort. And worse yet, he even asked her out, so it's definitely not some sort of pity date, and Juno insists that she doesn't care what Polly does, and she's not jealous, but Leah remains unconvinced. But yeah, that was a freaking lie, because Juno immediately goes and confronts poor Polly for asking Katie out, even though Juno suggested it during winter. The whirlwind of feelings from the pregnancy, coupled with this uncomfortable exchange, understandably causes Juno to lash out at Polly, but he reminds her how she broke his heart by not answering his offer to be together. Juno sarcastically hopes that Polly and, quote, Soup Girl have a great time at the prom, and then, to Polly's credit, he does try to carry Juno's bag, but she doesn't let him. After school, she drives all the way back out to the Lorings, where Vanessa is again working late, but Mark is excited to show Juno something. Mark leads her to the basement where all of his nerdy stuff is boxed up, and he gives her his favorite comic from back in the day, Most Fruitful Yuki. Juno confesses the comic actually makes her feel less like a fat dork, but onto why Juno is here. She brought her music for Mark to listen to. Mark then immediately recognizes the first song as the one he danced to back in the day for his prom, and Juno tells Mark that she can see him awkwardly dancing while she was mockingly imitating him. Mark then corrects her hands, and soon the two are actually enjoying the slow dance together. But then Mark says he's leaving Vanessa. Juno can't believe what she's hearing, which catches Mark off guard because he was getting very different signals from their meetings and thought that she would be happy with his decision, when in reality, that couldn't be further from the truth. Juno wanted him to raise this kid with Vanessa. Bren's lessons are undoubtedly hitting Juno like a freight train whenever Mark asks her what she thinks of him and why she's here. Juno said that she just likes being a part of his weird, interesting life, but Mark observes how all the stuff he loves has been reduced to boxes in his basement. Juno thinks that this is all her fault, but Mark confesses that he and Vanessa have been falling out of love for a while. Mark realizes that he's totally misread things, and he feels like an idiot, and Juno feels overwhelmed, so she leaves in tears. However, Vanessa arrives home just as Juno was leaving the basement, and immediately Vanessa wants to know why she's crying. Juno tries not to answer, but Mark catches up and tries to wave it off as hormones, but the cat is out of the bag at this point, so Mark explains to his wife that he's having cold feet again. Vanessa goes on damage control and tries to vouch for Mark, saying that he'll come around once he sees the kid, but Mark doubles down that he still has dreams in the music industry. Vanessa then harshly tells her husband that if she has to wait for him to become a rock star for her to become a mom, it'll never happen. Mark apathetically says that he never said he'd be a good father, which causes Juno to finally slam the door and leave. So get this, Most Fruitful Yuki is a real comic book with a heartwarming inspiration. In 2001, 17-year-old Japanese artist Hayato Saito was lending a sympathetic ear to his sister, Yuki Takahashi, about how her pregnancy was leaving her feeling bored, frustrated, and scared. Saito soon came up with a sketch for Yuki to show his sister, and together, they developed the idea for a fierce warrior intent on protecting her husband and her unborn child. Saito worked tirelessly and was able to give Yuki the comic as a baby gift. Juno now feels like the rug has been completely pulled out from underneath her feet, so she stays up late looking at the night sky and wondering what to do next, but then it dawns on her that the solution is actually pretty simple, and she writes a note not even 10 words long. Over at the Lorings, Mark and Vanessa were discussing their divorce that would inevitably follow their earlier falling out. Just as Vanessa seems to be giving up on her dream of being a mom after all, they get a knock on the door. When Mark answers, Juno's van is speeding off, but she left him a note, which Vanessa snatches, claiming that it's for her. When Juno gets home, only her dad is there, and he can tell something is weighing on her pretty heavily, so she confides in him that she's feeling a little disheartened that people can never stay together forever. Mac admits that he knows he doesn't have a perfect track record, but he's been with her stepmom for over 10 years, and they're very happy. Adding to his point, he says that you have to find someone who loves you for exactly who you are. Then things tend to work out from there, and that person is worth sticking around with. Juno thinks for a moment and says she's found that person, and Mac jokes that, yeah, her dear old dad is right here. But as his words of wisdom sink in, she says that she needs to step out for a while, and then she and Leah are seen getting up to some sort of shenanigans. The following morning, Polly Bleecker goes to leave for his morning run whenever he sees a note instructing him to check his mailbox chalked on his patio. Whenever he does, tons of boxes of orange Tic Tacs start flooding out. Then later, while running with his team again, Polly sees Juno walking towards him, so he beelines over to her. Juno confirms that the Tic Tacs were from her, and then she sincerely apologizes at snapping at him the other day about prom before dropping the real bombshell. She's in love with him. She thinks that he is the coolest person without even trying. He's also smart, and every time she sees him, the baby kicks super hard. She thinks it's because seeing him makes her heart start pounding, and he confesses to feeling the exact same way about her. And then he asks if they can make out. Then Leah, who's practicing cheerleading nearby, affectionately warns her friend that sucking phase can lead to early labor, so Juno affectionately flips her off. Then during one unassuming afternoon, Juno was laying in bed whenever her water broke, so she shouts the code phrase, "Thundercats are go!" Which I find particularly funny because my wife actually knows Larry Kenney, the voice of Lion-O from Thundercats. But I digress. Much like the ultrasound appointment, Leah and Bren are with Juno for every uncomfortable and painful moment until, eventually, a beautiful baby boy is born. They didn't want to tell Polly about her starting labor because he had this big track meet, but after he noticed her absence in the crowd, Polly figured it out and even broke a district record so he could get out of there as soon as possible and run to Juno's side. Afterwards, we jump back over to Juno after she's finished delivering the baby, and Mac is there comforting her by promising her that she'll be back here one day, but on her own terms. She gives him a half smile, but then they hear a rhythmic tap, 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 followed by Polly entering the room, grinning ear to ear to see Juno. Then Mac gives the two some much-needed alone time, and Polly lays in bed with Juno, and she melts into a puddle of tears in his arms. The both of them decline to see the baby because, well, it wasn't theirs. It was always Vanessa's, and even if she can't believe it yet, she's a mother now. Vanessa notices Bren watching her hold her son for the first time, and she wants to know how she looks, and Bren replies, "Like a new mom, scared out of your mind." Then things wrap up really nicely from here. From Polly's recliner to Vanessa's nursing station, the story begins how it ended, with a chair. And above it we see Juno's decisive 9-word note that reads, "Vanessa, if you're still in, I'm still in. Juno." We finally finish here in summer, and it serves as a nice little epilogue of sorts. Juno is preparing for her next chapter in life, as evidenced by the garage sale taking place in her front yard. But first, she's off to see Polly, with her guitar slung over her shoulder. As she bikes over, she thinks, quote, "He is the cheese to my macaroni, and I know people are supposed to fall in love before they reproduce, but normalcy's not our style," end quote. And whenever she gets to Polly's house, he's already waiting out front with his guitar in hand, and as they start to play together, the two seem to fall right into place, like a couple of puzzle pieces destined to be together forever. The final scene of the movie was also the last shot they filmed, which is pretty uncommon, but they almost had to shut down production and film the scene months later due to weather. But the rain let up for just a day and they got the shot. Also, Juno and Polly were singing "Anyone Else But You" by the Multi Peaches, and band member Kimya Dawson was on set to help them practice the poignant closing song. But with all that being said, that's all I got on Juno. Ring the bell if you don't hate movies, and until next week, y'all be good. Hey, you made it to the end. Remember, if you want to revisit any more of your favorite movies, check the links on screen, but otherwise, subscribe and I'll catch you for a new breakdown next week. Thanks.